Good, good morning to all who managed to connect this morning. We are delighted to have maintained this conference with Stephen MAIJOOR despite the containment and the health crisis, even if distance has also its limits. I hope that the digital revolution in progress will allow us to listen to what Stephen has to tell us this morning, and that we can all be connected until the end of this conference. You will have the possibility to ask your question by email, and then we'll forward to Stephen because we have a chat. I am now going to have a few words and presentation about the Center for Financial Professions, Centre des Professions Financières, through which this conference is being organized. The Center for Financial Profession is a recognized association of general interest whose pedagogical vocation is to understand and promote understanding of financial profession and their evolution. This morning's conference is therefore perfectly in line with this objective. Now, I have also to present Stephen MAIJOOR. Stephen MAIJOOR has been the chair of the European Securities and Markets Authorities since taking up office in April 2011. He is the first chair of this authority and is currently serving his second 5-year term. He is responsible for representing the authority as well as chairing ESMA's board of supervisor and management board. The role of the board of supervisors is to give strategic guidance to ESMA and make all main regulatory and supervision decisions. Prior to taking this role, Stephen was managing director at AFM, the Dutch financial markets regulator, where he was responsible for capital market supervision. Before joining the regulatory world, Stephen was the dean of the School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University. He holds a PhD in business economics from Maastricht University. So, welcome. The topic that we felt it was very important to raise concerned the evolution of capital market union, the financing of growth of European companies being a major issue in this period of economic and health crisis. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie-Agnès, for that kind introduction. Many thanks to you, but also to Michel Peberot for inviting me to this breakfast, and probably I should say breakfast between brackets, because we all need to have our breakfasts back home. But very good that despite the containment measures and with the help of modern technology, we can have this discussion, this debate. And while I will surely make an introduction, I'm also looking forward to receiving your questions. If you would like to ask your questions in French, I would be fine with that. I should be able to understand that, and if there is, and if not, I'm sure I will get some help. So, as said, very good to be invited by your center. I know your center has already a long history and was established in the 50s of the previous century, and we know, of course, that for the financial services sector is that professional development is extremely important. We are all working in a sector where knowledge, expertise is playing a critical role, and the center is an important actor in France in that respect. As said, I very much regret that we're not now in, let's say, in a normal situation. I so much enjoy going around Paris. As you know, Paris is the home country, the seat, the location of ESMA, and I've always considered it to be a privilege to be working from Paris. As you will understand, as a Dutchman, I mainly cycle through Paris, and I must say I also want to praise the progress in Paris in terms of getting more and more bicycle lanes and improving the situation for a Dutchman like me living in Paris. So with that, let's now go to the substance of my contribution. And as Marie-Agnès announced already, I would like to talk about the Capital Markets Union, make some broader remarks around the Capital Markets Union, but also reflect on how the capital markets have performed during this COVID-19 crisis. To ensure a successful Capital Markets Union, it is important that investors, retail investors, feel comfortable participating in a capital market. And so, and of course, they should be prepared for difficult times in capital markets. As we all know from our textbooks, the improved risks, the improved returns that you can get in the capital markets are also related to the increased risks. At the same time, we should ensure is that markets are working in an orderly way, that they're stable, and that investors are protected. And so what I would like to do in my contribution, basically three components. First, talking about the performance of the capital markets during this COVID-19 crisis. Secondly, reflect on the action plan that was issued recently already a few months ago by the European Commission. And finally, also reflect on sustainability, because for me, sustainability should be a part also of the recovery and of the Capital Market Union. So with that, let me first start with the performance of the financial markets, of the capital markets during this COVID-19 crisis. And as we all aware, in terms of impact, the COVID-19 crisis is at least as impactful as the global financial crisis, the crisis that started in or developed basically in 2008. But what is, I think, very special and distinctive around the COVID-19 crisis is how short the time period was in which this impact was coming to the surface in the financial markets. And so basically the volatility and the market impact that we saw from mid-March and the weeks after that, and what was in a few weeks, was in terms of impact very similar to what we saw during the global financial crisis, but there it played out basically in 2 years in terms of market impact. And so the market volatility, the market impact was extreme in March and April. And of course, what had to happen was, in addition to this enormous impact on financial markets, which was the reflection of new information on future economic developments because of these containment measures, is that in parallel, the whole financial markets needed to work on a remote basis. And I must say, it's been, of course, a hugely impactful event and development, the COVID-19 crisis. But I think where we should look back at some satisfaction is how well the moving to a remote situation has been going, and where basically the whole financial market was working from, people working remotely, people working from home, and apparently the also the IT systems being able to cope with that new situation. I think it's important to realize is that and focusing on the issue of the Capital Market Union and financial markets, while the global financial crisis was mainly a crisis and the stress was focused on the banking system, this is a crisis where until now most of the stress and most of the focus has been on the non-banking system. And so it is clearly is that in terms of where has been the weaknesses, where has been the increased stress, most of the stress coming to the surface in the COVID-19 crisis, much less so in the banking system, and indeed a strong focus on the non-banking system. Of course, we do not know whether that will continue like this. The banking sector is obviously closely monitoring the non-performing loans and the fact that the corporates, the non-financials that are heavily impacted by this COVID-19 crisis, by the containment measures, whether that ultimately will also start to impact significantly the balance sheets of banks. We'll need to see that. But so far, most of the focus has been on the non-banking sector. Then focusing on the non-banking sector, I think I would like to make a few further remarks. So first of all, and probably as also already reflected in my remarks, I think the market infrastructure, so we're talking there about trading venues, CCPs, CSDs, these market infrastructures, despite the extreme volatility, they have performed adequately. And I think it's interesting to note there is that especially for CCPs, it was in some sense a test case, because as many of you will know, is that what is been happening after the global financial crisis is that in the past 10 years, more and more derivatives have been cleared in CCPs, have been centrally cleared. It was one of the lessons learned of the global financial crisis. And to some extent, this was the first time that there was this real-life stress testing of these CCPs. And I think we can be looking back at the adequate response of those CCPs to the extreme volatility, to the increased trading in derivatives and the required margin requirements, and the system there has worked adequately. Where probably we have had and we continue to have the biggest concerns looking back at let's say since mid-March, the asset management sector, where and within the asset management sector, it is important to differentiate, let's say, generally open-ended funds vis-a-vis money market funds. And as you probably are aware, and has already been, and these comments have been made by me, but they've also been made by other regulators, Europe, the UK, but also globally, is that money market funds were under severe stress, probably the most stress in the financial markets during the COVID-19 turmoil of March and April. I think they didn't respond properly to the stress, and although with hindsight they didn't, there was no need to implement gates or redemption holds. The realization is that the money market funds were able to continue within the regulatory requirements because of the central bank interventions. And so that is an area where we need to look at further. Going to the more general open-ended funds, we saw a lot of stress, especially with real estate and at European level, and with corporate funds. And again, here, of course, there are differences across the jurisdictions. Overall, we are quite satisfied also how generally open-ended funds reacted to the stress, although we saw an increased use of exceptional liquidity management tools, whereby they put restrictions on redemptions by investors. But at the same time, the absolute level of the use of these liquidity management tools was pretty modest. I think where our current concerns are, most of our current concerns are, is the decoupling that we're seeing between the capital markets and the underlying economic situation. Of course, there's been some positive news on the underlying economic situation because of the good results on the testing of vaccines and the perspective of the distribution of vaccines, and possibly getting much more back to a normal life in the course of 2021. But at the same time, it should be a matter of concern that currently we have record-breaking market valuations beating records from the past, while at the same time the economic impact is very strong. The economic situation is very grim, and so that continues to be a concern from the perspective of financial markets. So with that, I would like to go basically to the second part of my contribution, which is specifically on the Capital Markets Union and the action plan from the European Commission. And let me make first a few generic remarks where the Capital Markets Union is going. And obviously, for me, always the Capital Markets Union is a longer-term process where we try to integrate European capital markets. And although I think it's been smart to use the term Capital Markets Union since the start of 2015, that was at that time introduced by Commissioner Hill. The reality is, of course, and for those of you who are very much into EU legislation, we know that there's already been for decades various steps to increase the integration of European capital markets. There are two more points that I would like to make. I think the first one is, of course, the question is the Capital Markets Union, should it be around removing barriers? Should it be trying to get more consistency around capital markets and integrating the current capital markets that we have at national level? Or is there also an issue about inherently low capital market activity even at the national level? And in my view, both elements are extremely important. And to some extent, most of the focus in the past years has been on, let's say, trying to reduce the barriers, the differences between the member states regarding capital markets, and trying to increase in that way, the size and the integration of the European capital markets. But I think what is equally important to realize is that the EU not only should work on integrating capital markets, but it's also about trying to increase anyhow the level of capital market activities. And so independent of the integration issue, an issue across many member states is that the level of capital market activity per se is quite modest. And that relates, and that is my second point, that relates to the fact that we, for example, still have a very dominant banking system, not only, let's say, on the side of the supply or the demand for capital, or the let's say the various channels within the financial system, but also if you look, let's say, at the end investor or the households in Europe, and it's a well-known point, they tend to save through deposits, while it will be beneficial both for them as households, but also for the economic system or the financial system in general, when also the households would save a bigger part of their savings or invest a bigger part of their savings in the capital market. We all know this from our textbooks at high school, at university, is that in the longer term you get a better return on your savings when you participate in the capital market. You need to incur some risks to get a better return over the longer term. And of course, what is so surprising to see is that despite the extremely low interest levels, is that European households are still saving mainly through the banking system rather than being involved in the capital markets. That would be beneficial for the retail investor, would be beneficial for households if there would be better participation. And I'm talking here necessarily, of course, about the longer term, if they would more participate in the capital market, but it would also be more generally beneficial for the financial system. There's been, of course, it's well known that a better balance between the capital markets and the banking system would make the system more stable, but also typically equity capital is more helpful and more supportive to innovative developments, to innovative economic activity. We know that some of the vaccines that were now developed, some of them were developed by large, well-known pharmaceuticals, but some of them also had a history in relatively small biotech companies. And it's typically these type of economic activities that benefit from a system where you have a stronger capital market, because capital markets are typically more favorable towards high-risk, innovative activities. And that is the type of activities that we could use within the EU. Let me then go to the CMU plan itself. The CMU plan, and I know there's been the action plan that was published by the Commission in September of this year. There's been a number of activities before that. There was this so-called high-level forum, which was based on stakeholders giving their advice, and this advice from these stakeholders have been, by and large, been adopted in the action plan by the Commission. But I would also like to mention the specific initiative that was taken by the French government, the Dutch government, the German government, to have a dedicated report that was the next CMU report, which was headed by Fabrice de Marigny. Many of you will know Fabrice, and that also made this point of the importance of a bigger role of the retail investor household participation in the capital markets. What is important from the action plan, it is a mixture of legislative proposals by the Commission, but also some more, let's say, non-legislative proposals. I'm sure that the further, let's say, making the plans more substantive and more tangible, that will develop in the months and the years ahead. In total, there were 16 action points within the plan by the Commission, and I would like to take out a few from those 16 action points. And obviously, these action points are also a reflection of the priorities at ESMA's side on these action points. So one of the action points that we think is very important, and it seems to be a more technical one, is the one around the single access point, the European single access point to information on companies in the EU. One of the problems, and especially for the smaller listed companies and the non-listed companies, is that they don't get sufficient attention in a cross-border situation from investors. And so it is important that we try to make this information better available to investors across the member states. And a lot of this information is already submitted by companies at a national level to their business registrars or even to the national securities regulator. But that information is not easily accessible at a European level. And so one of the proposals in one of the action points is to get to a model to the single access point where it would be easier at European level to get access to this information, which is now still, let's say, somewhat hidden in the national systems, make it available for investors. And so investors can have this information easily available when they would like to invest in, let's say, a smaller company listed in another part of Europe. Initially, this is about, it will be financial information, but it's also important that over time we bring in sustainability information into the system, because we know that sustainability information nowadays is also so important for making investment decisions. The second one, and that I think is an important one, coming from the action point, and it will not surprise you, is the issue around financial literacy, investor education. As I mentioned earlier, it is so surprising that so small parts of European households are still saving primarily through the banking system. And so what is important is that there is a better understanding of the relative benefits and characteristics of savings, and saving through the banking system versus saving through and investing through the capital market system. But also, once you invest in the capital market, that you do it in an appropriate way, and that you do it with understanding of what capital investing requires. And so the action point around improving financial literacy should be a priority within the CMU list of action plans. That also links to the next topic, which is not so much around education per se, but is more around investor protection and making sure that products that are sold is that they are transparent, is that they are as efficient as possible. For those of you who know ESMA well, we have made and we have systematically emphasized the importance of improving the efficiency of financial products, making sure that the costs are brought down. In Europe, the cost of financial products is relatively high compared to some other regions in the world. And so investor protection, transparency, cost of financial products should also be a priority. The other item that I would like to mention very briefly is the need for a consolidated tape. We have been in support since 2019. We have explicitly advised to move to a consolidated tape on equities, on shares in the EU. We think it would help to bring costs down on market data. One of the issues that is a concern to a significant number of market participants is that the cost of market data are increasing, and we think that a consolidated tape regarding equity shares can play an important role in that respect. Finally, the final action point, and it will not surprise you, that I would like to mention is the commitment of the Commission to look further into the European supervisory authorities, the convergence powers that we have, the powers that we have regarding direct supervision. Maybe two quick remarks here. First of all, if you look at the history of ESMA in the past 10 years, we have strengthened the convergence powers of ESMA, and we have increased the number of areas that are under direct supervision of ESMA. That has been a gradual process of stronger convergence powers, of more activities or more financial market activities under direct supervision. As you probably are aware, there's now also the third country CCPs are under supervision of ESMA. And what I very much hope that process will continue in the years to come, and that we, and in my view, for a very long time, and I think maybe even the ultimate model in securities markets will be a model where you will have continue this combination of supervision at national level with convergence powers, but on the other hand also some areas under direct supervision. I would hope that in the years to come that process will continue. And regarding direct supervision, I would really hope that in the next step, for example, will be that also European CCPs will come under European supervision. I think it is problematic that we now have a model where third country CCPs are under supervision of ESMA, but European CCPs are still at national level, although admittedly under strong convergence powers. Let me then finally spend a few minutes on the issue of sustainability. Being a Paris organization, we feel, of course, very much linked and about to the Paris Agreement. We are very much convinced as securities regulators, as a body, that sustainability should become, and we basically already progressed on that very much, a integrated part of financial markets. The key reasons for that, of course, are on the one hand, investors, when they get information on economic activities, they need to understand the sustainability impact of those decisions. And so when you invest in an oil company, you should be aware of the impact of that investment on the environment. And so better information available to investors on the sustainability impact of their investments is important. But in addition to that, what we're also seeing is that investors not only want to let's say, have the full picture in terms of the impact of the environment of their decision. Let's say from an economic standpoint, the direction is in two ways. On the one hand, this is around the impact of the environment on their investment, but it's also the impact of the investment on the environment. And what we're seeing more and more is that also investors are willing to forego some risk or willing to forego some return when they know that their investment is also a sustainable one. And so that is the reason that we need to work on that. At the same time, I should also say that the securities markets, the financial system, should be complementary to the broader government interventions here to make the system more sustainable and get to a sustainable economy. And so although the financial markets can play an important role, in my view, it is first and foremost also very important that the government's progress with taxation, with subsidies, with carbon pricing. And I think while this is not a remark about complacency, it should not be the case, is that a heavy lifting needs to be done by the financial markets, while the core incentives coming from subsidies, pricing, and taxation are not there. So it's equally important, for example, the fact that one of the most polluting industries, which is the air carrier business, is still not paying taxation, of course, is a concern to me as a citizen. And I know it is outside of the mandate of ESMA, but I think it's important to make that point. We have been, for those of you following us closely, we have been involved in many sustainability initiatives. We have given advice last year to the Commission on how to integrate sustainability risks into asset management, into investment firms. We have issued reports on short-termism. We're now working on the sustainable finance disclosure regulation. I know that raises a lot of concerns by the financial industry about the detail and the impact and the availability of data. We're listening carefully to those concerns, and we expect to finalize our proposal on this technical standard in January. And finally, of course, we're also closely involved in the non-financial reporting directive, which is more around the sustainability reporting by the corporates, by the non-financials. And maybe final remarks on that point, and then I will hand over to Marie-Agnès. We need to ensure, first of all, is that there is consistency, as much as possible consistency between the sustainability requirements for the financial sector and the sustainability requirements for the non-financial sector. Ultimately, these requirements from the non-financial sector will be reflected in disclosures by asset managers, and we need to ensure that this is coordinated and that this is consistent. Secondly, we should ensure, and while it is very good and important that Europe is in the lead here, we should also ensure that in the medium term we go to global standards for reporting on sustainability. Just like it is important that financial reporting is consistent, not only within the EU, but also on a global level, we should also strive towards consistency in sustainability reporting. So let me stop here, Marie-Agnès, and happy to take any questions from your side.
Okay, thank you very much, Steven, for this presentation of this action plan at the Capital Market Union. I can perhaps ask the first question because we are waiting for the others. How health research funding fits into the strategic plan of Capital Market Union?
You mean research in general, or
You know that with the health crisis, the research on health. You speak of and research. Is it some objectives of this plan on this topic?
No, I think sorry, I get a little technical instruction here that I should put that there's an echo. Is it better like this? I'm just checking whether is the echo gone. I got an instruction from Ugo. Is it okay? Is it okay? So can you hear me well? You hear me well, Marie-Agnès?
I think that it's okay. Yes.
Okay. Now, just two things on the healthcare issue. So we did not, we do not foresee any, specific arrangement around the capital market union and healthcare, in the sense that there is a specific point on healthcare financing or healthcare funding. But I think there are two related points that I would like to make. I think the first issue is that, and I made that point already during my opening remarks, is that capital market activity, in my view, is better and is more conducive to innovative economic activities. And so obviously, one of those industries where innovation is extremely important is the healthcare industry. And as I just said, I think it was the first vaccine that received that had the, let's say, first positive results on the impact of the vaccination and how effective they were in protecting against the healthcare risk related to COVID-19. The first one was the result of a large established pharmaceutical, but combined with a biotech company. And it are typically these type of biotech companies for which the capital markets are so important. The other angle on the capital market union, more generally, of course, is that the capital market should allow for adjustments in the structural adjustments in our economies. What we're observing now is that although we would expect it next year to go back to a life which is closer to normal, the COVID-19 crisis as such has, of course, also affected very structural issues within our economy. And we can expect that after COVID-19, the performance of the various industries will be very differently compared to pre-COVID. You can already expect at this stage is that the healthcare industry will be an industry that will use more capital because it will become even a more important part of our societies or our economy because of healthcare. The issues around healthcare risks will be a more permanent part of our societies, while other parts, of course, which will be impacted and are impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, is everything that relates to technology. We can also see it in the performance at the stock markets, is that healthcare and technology companies are doing very well. There's been an acceleration of the IT sector, and we can see it, of course, on our day-to-day business and the fact that we're doing this now remote, but it also is affecting, for example, supply chains. And I think that is an issue that will not reverse back to a pre-COVID-19 situation. And I think the same probably can be said around business travel. And I would personally expect that business travel would be very different after, let's say, once we get back to a more normal situation than compared to pre-crisis situation.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions. Do you see the question, Stephen? We have one question about taxation. We'll talk about the importance of considering taxation. What will be done for companies like Amazon that export the activities to pay lower tax? Are there specific measures to be implemented?
Well, I talked about taxation, made two remarks on the taxation issue. And I talked about taxation not in a general sense, but I talked about this from the sustainability perspective. And the point that I wanted to make is that while the financial sector can play an important role in the transformation of our economies towards sustainable economies, I think the prime driver should be taxation and subsidies and pricing. And so I think it is important that we as financial sector take our responsibility and that we make sure that sustainability information is available, that sustainability risks are taken into account. But I think it's also equally important that we signal to governments, to policymakers, is that it should be a complementary activity compared to the prime drive that should come from taxation, subsidies, and pricing. And so that was the reason for talking about this one. And the example that I gave is obviously the fact that, for example, air travel is still not taxed is an enormous problem. And the fact, and there is no disclosure that can help solve that issue. And that really is a responsibility that governments need to take, where they start looking into that matter of whether getting the proper pricing. And of course, this goes back to all of us who are economists, is that externalities should be properly priced to ensure that we have a well-performing economic system. The other issue, of course, and that is that goes outside of our mandate, but of course, just like we have the risk of regulatory competition in financial markets, there's also the risk of taxation competition across the EU, across the globe, and we know that Europe is getting more and more focused on this matter. I see another question, I think, on credit rating agencies, and so maybe a few points on credit rating agencies. So. In my recollection, the credit rating agencies are not directly mentioned in the action plan, not at least a main action point. They may, maybe included somewhere in some of the details. Some of the way the credit rating agencies are relevant, I think, to capital markets is in various ways. So first of all, what we have done in terms of sustainability is we have issued guidance to credit rating agencies to ensure that ratings, and I'm talking here about credit quality ratings, is that they sufficiently take into account and properly take into account sustainability risks when there is a credit quality assessment. You can imagine that heavily polluting companies are at risk of, basically losing their license to do business, or that the way they are working may become obsolete. And so that increases their credit risk. And so it is important that rating agencies take that information into account when they issue a credit rating on a company. The other development, of course, that we're seeing is, and that is not so much about credit quality ratings issued by credit rating agencies, but what we're also seeing is sustainability ratings being issued by rating agencies. It's a new business where credit rating agencies play an important role, but there it's not so much around the credit quality of the ratings. It's not about credit quality, but it's about rating the sustainability levels of corporates. And of course, that is a whole new area. It is also an area where there's a debate. Should there be more standards? Should they be regulated? As I've indicated before, it is important that we progress here from a public standpoint. It is important these sustainability ratings are used, and so we should have certain criteria for this rating information on sustainability. And personally, I'm also in favor of bringing these sustainability ratings under supervision at one point in time. And so, in that sense, also rating agencies play an important role in the sustainability development.
There are some other questions.
Let me see.
One from Hugues Gruska. We all understand the benefits of capital markets union, but it does not seem to be a priority at country level or national political agenda. How this can be addressed going forward?
So I think what we should do is we should clearer make the case both at European level but also at national level, is that economic systems where capital markets play a more important role are better economic systems, are better performing economic systems. They better perform because they are more stable, they are less risky. We know that Europe paid a very high price for a large banking sector in response to the global financial crisis. But it also improves the savings on the size of the households. It's just incredible. If households would have been more participating in the capital markets, let's say in the past 10 years, they would have been much better off in terms of their personal households, in their households savings, than the very large chunks of saving through deposits. And of course, I should refrain from being an investment advisor. That should not be my role. But we know that in the longer term, this is more beneficial for those households. We know that in some countries, there are households are concerned about capital markets because they see banks, understandably so, in terms of their return, in terms of their savings, as a safer option. And so the other way to achieve this, of course, is through pension systems, and that is clearly an area where governments can play an important role. And so this bigger participation by households can either be directly, because they invest directly into the capital markets, but you can also have systems where pension systems play where governments take the initiative to develop and build pension systems, either pension systems where you give rights to households to say, with a certain tax benefit, you can invest directly into the capital market, or just have really second pillar pension funds, where even the households themselves are not involved in the investment decisions. We need to make this push, and I also understand that part of the action points is to monitor the progress on these pension systems by the member states. And just a final comment here: we know that those countries that have a deep and liquid capital market also have, many of those countries also have strong pension systems. I think Sweden, small country, they have a very strong capital market. Why? Because they embarked on a pension system which was closely connected to the capital markets. We know that the UK, the Netherlands, but also the US, of course, all countries where pension systems are closely tied to the capital markets, and I think that would really helps developing capital markets.
There is another question, Stephen, about the role of private equity and
Yes. So this is a question around, and I think it's from Kazia, who makes the point that I talked a lot about listed companies, but she makes the good point is that this is not only, and I fully agree with that, around listed companies, but it's also about private equity and let's say the phase before a company gets listed, and I fully agree with that. Obviously, as a securities regulator, our instruments are typically more focused on capital markets, on listed capital markets, because that is where our regulatory tools are typically, although we can play somewhat of a role regarding private equity, for example, on the fund side. I think for private equity, the other issue, obviously, what is very important, there are issues around taxation and making somehow also private equity available to investors, retail investors, without necessarily being listed. We know also that anyhow is that in various countries across the world is that the role of private equity is increasing, and the role of the listed part is getting more reduced. And you rightly say that we should also invest in actions that can improve the development of private equity. But I think some of those are less out of the remit of the securities regulator, but more, for example, in programs related to more beneficial taxation.
There is another question. You recently said that the ban of commission for financial products should be considered at a European level. What is your opinion for commission-driven insurance retail markets in France? It's perhaps a question for EIOPA also, but...
Sorry, that is. I'm just getting a cup of coffee, so thank you very much for that. That's my spouse, so she very kindly brought me some coffee.
So you saw this question from Vincent Roger.
Yes. So this is a sensitive topic, and I know that this is also an area where we ESMA not necessarily agrees with some of the policymakers in France. A couple of comments on this. So first of all, we recognize that there is an issue around research availability for companies in general, but also for SMEs. It is a problem and it is a concern. At the same time, when we looked at this matter and simply looked at the evidence, it appeared that the reduction in research available on SMEs, but more generally on listed companies, has been reducing basically for the last decade. And so it is a quite continuous reduction in research availability. And also our researchers, and also what we've seen from academic research in this area, is that with the introduction of MiFID II, is that there has not been an impact on research available for SMEs. And so we said is that bundling it again will not positively impact research, because this trend has been already going on when research was bundled. On the other hand, what we have seen as a benefit of unbundling is the reduction of costs of financial products. And so we are very concerned around taking away this benefit of reduced cost. We know that there's been a lot of overproduction of research, is that there's been a lot of recycling of research, and ultimately somebody's paying for that. And so I'm very concerned that we're going back to that world where in reality a lot of the information that is shared is not research, but it's in reality it is marketing material for which the investor is paying, because ultimately it's the investor that is paying for that material. And so that is the reason that we shared our concern again. I know that this point is not shared by some in the industry, not shared by policymakers, by some of the policymakers in France, but I cannot ignore the evidence that we have collected and the evidence that has been collected by researchers. The other thing that we were very concerned about was that the proposal that was made was that the threshold for an SME was put at such a high level that basically 90% of the companies would be exempted from the unbundling requirement, and we thought that is, bringing away or stopping a model that has been successful and that is even considered in other parts of the world. I'm coming from a country, and I know I'm biased here, where we have banned inducements both for the insurance sector, but also for the distribution of financial products. And we can see the benefits in terms of the better pricing of products here in the Netherlands if you compare it to other countries across the EU.
Perhaps one question about CCP. You mentioned CCP and the supervision of CCP that can generate some systemic risk, and it's very important to have a European supervision. What are the next steps on that topic?
Well, so a couple of points, as I made clear in my opening remarks, is that CCPs, third country CCPs, can be supervised and are supervised by ESMA. We have identified 2 UK CCPs as so-called tier 2 CCPs, so they're systemically, they're relevant from a systemic perspective. And what we now need to do, and that qualifying them as a tier 2 CCPs was possible because of a time-limited equivalence decision by the European Commission. What we announced when we recognized or said that we would recognize on the 1st of January at the end of the transition period these two UK CCPs is that we would also conduct a so-called assessment whether too systemic to be recognized, and that implies that we should consider the issue. Is this so important for the EU? Is that we should consider, as it's called, relocation of these clearing activities to the EU? We need to be prepared for that. First and foremost, because we also assume that these tier 2 CCPs is that we can properly work together with the regulators in the UK. I feel confident that we can do that. At the same time, you always need to be prepared when there would be a situation where that cooperation would become more difficult and not effective anymore. But also, there are issues around it is so essential for the stability of the European financial system is that it should be relocated. And so that is the reason that we will conduct that analysis in the upcoming 18 months. That will be done by the new CCP Supervisory Committee. As you probably are aware, the new chair and the full-time 2 independent members will arrive at ESMA on the 1st of December. But in addition to that, I think a discussion around relocation needs to be linked to a debate on supervision of EU CCPs at European level, because it would be very odd if we would insist on relocation, but the actual information on this activity would then be at a European level. It would be less because these CCPs would be this clearing activity would go to the national level within Europe. And I think that is a very asymmetric situation, is that we on the one hand say this is so systemically important for Europe that it should be relocated, but subsequently it would then go in Europe at the national level, where in reality there would be less information available at European level. European securities regulators, which would not be involved directly in this clearing activity, would have less information on that clearing activity than when it would be supervised at European level in a third country CCP. So for me, the debate on relocation, and they are too systemic to be relocated, I think needs to be linked to a debate on supervision of European CCPs. And I think the final comment, there's typically the argument against European level supervision is an issue about fiscal responsibility being at national level. But the reality is that if a CCP gets into trouble and there's going to be issues around losses, well, first of all, we should avoid, against any price that shareholder or taxholder, the taxation and the taxpayers should be involved. But if there would be losses in a CCP, there is automatically also debate who pays for these losses. Is it a CCP or is it the clearing members? And these clearing members are located in different member states. And so I think the arguments for supervising CCPs, EU CCPs at European levels is very strong. Let me stop here, Marie-Agnès.
Thank you very much. I think that the time is over. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you to Stephen MAIJOOR for this intervention. We have now a better also understanding of the issues involved in this Union of Capital Markets. Thank you also for all your participation in this conference. We look forward to seeing you the next ones. And for those who are not yet members of the Center for Financial Profession, join the Center and its many projects, conferences, and publication. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. It was very nice, Marie-Agnès. Thank you very much for the questions. Very good to hear you and to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.